It is a good and not a bad thing to remember our nation's dead who fought and died in war. It is also good that more recently we have begun to take into account long disregarded deaths among Commonwealth allies who fought and died in common cause with us in the past. Yet our present-day national memory remains selective, limited to honouring in earnest only our warriors and our civilians killed in wars or acts of terrorism. We will often take great and noble care to discover, share and preserve knowledge of their deaths. More often than not, their names will be engraved on our monuments in the hope that they might also be engraved on our hearts. But we make no remotely comparable efforts to record and acknowledge deaths among the indigenous populations in the lands where we and our allies conduct today's wars. Nor, of course, do we raise comparable monuments in their memory, for how can we memorialize that which we never cared to discover in the first place? I speak to you on this Remembrance Sunday as the co-founder in late 2002 of an organization dedicated to documenting the civilian victims of the US-UK-led invasion of Iraq and its continuing local aftermath. It is an honor to contribute to an event which seeks to extend our compassion to all victims of war, civilian as well as military, whether from our side or not, or of closely shared ethnicity and backgrounds or not. A truly inclusive remembrance. Much remains to be done, of course, but this is the direction in which our society must travel, and urgently. We named our project the Iraq Body Count, in part as a response to the hideous concept of body counts as a measure of progress as put forward in the Vietnam War. Body counts should never be seen in a positive light, no matter what the context, and we have tried to ensure that this one, at least, isn't. The reason for creating the project itself was that, like many others, we feared mass casualties among Iraqis and could see that the US-UK-led coalition would refuse to engage in any casualty recording themselves, as was already evident in Afghanistan. We will get to their excuses shortly, but we knew that many deaths would be reported by local and international reporters, by NGOs and others on the ground, including in hospitals and morgues. If continuously and methodically collected, we could prevent their deaths being lost to the public record. In a very real sense, our project has been a struggle against forgetting that which was fleetingly, often only obscurely known. It has not been easy. This was a responsibility which should never have fallen solely to a citizen-led organization, and the principal obstacle to knowledge of civilian casualties in Iraq and elsewhere remains the lack of any serious official engagement. So little do our officials care to learn about any possible victims that to this day they think it's sufficient to simply state that our military takes measures to avoid civilian harm. Measures claimed to be so effective, they need not inquire into whether they actually work. Thus, we bomb targets in populated environments, but fail to investigate the often deadly outcomes of these bombings for civilians, a disavowal of responsibility that our fellow casualty recording organization, Air Wars, has amply documented. And all of this refers to victims where the military actions and weapons are ours, where we are directly involved and bear equally direct and immediate responsibility. When it comes to the many other violent deaths resulting from our wars, people killed, for instance, in the civil wars which we set in motion, our leaders simply look to whoever else they can blame but themselves. If recorded or acknowledged at all, those victims serve only as a means to demonize the enemy of the day, which is, of course, exactly how those same enemies demonize us. This official lack of genuine interest in the casualties of our military operations was already so glaring and so out of touch with common sensibilities that in April 2004, 52 former British diplomats wrote in an open letter to then Prime Minister Tony Blair as follows: "The Iraqis killed by coalition forces probably total between 10 and 15,000. It is a disgrace that the coalition forces themselves appear to have no estimate. And the number killed in the last month in Fallujah alone is apparently several hundred, including many civilian men, women and children. Phrases such as, 'We mourn each loss of life,' 'We salute them and their families for their bravery and their sacrifice,' apparently referring only to those who have died on the coalition side, are not well judged to moderate the passions these killings arouse." We agree that this is a disgrace, and with Sir John Chilcot's Iraq inquiry, which also highlighted and clearly recommended an end to such neglect, a recommendation still not implemented more than 5 years later. Yet another clue into the mindset of our leaders is this: the individual who brought to light the largest single trove of information on casualties in Iraq, much but not yet all of which is integrated in our database, is Julian Assange through publication of the Iraq war logs. He is now confined to a high-security prison cell for this very act, an exercise of the very freedoms of thought and communication it is claimed our war dead die for. In contrast to these official approaches, or lack thereof, we set out to record all the civilian victims we could, as best we could. Ours has been a detailed recording, documenting the where, when, and nature of violent incidents in which civilians were killed, or of the finding of their bodies, or as recorded in morgue and other local reports. Imperfect and incomplete as our work must necessarily be, this much has been irrefutably documented: that over 200,000 Iraqi civilians of all ages and backgrounds suffered violent deaths. This means there are millions more who suddenly lost and now grieve for a family member. Millions more who lost a friend or colleague or neighbor. When it comes to people killed, the only proper question is who died, not merely how many. Each of those 200,000 had a name. Each was as individual as you or me. And it follows that each should be remembered as an individual whose life was violently ended, not just as a statistic. The Iraq Body Count database records the names and demographic details of civilian victims whenever possible, but despite our best efforts, less than 7% can yet be listed by name, and little more than a third by age or gender. I should note that even continuously reading out loud the names of that small percentage of the dead would take us into tomorrow morning. Merely counting is what we must do when we lack the means to properly record individual lives lost. We resort to it only to ensure that it is at least never forgotten that on that day, in that place, as a result of some specified form of armed violence, this many people were killed. Our work has also disproven another official excuse, that recording every casualty of armed conflict cannot be perfectly done and should therefore not be attempted. Yet those same governments are prepared to use our data when they need to, as have many others, from the World Health Organization on down, far too many to list here, nearly all concerned with the welfare of the war's primary victims and their living relatives. The war on Iraq was a war of choice, not of necessity, and as ill-justified and far from glorious as any in modern history. But it is also true that in the midst of war, acts of great courage and kindness can emerge, and it is inevitable that moments of national remembrance will recall these too. These these stories should not be limited to conflict participants alone. I've spoken to you in general and somewhat abstract terms. Allow me now to tell you of just one named individual killed in the war, a hero to me and others. I will read to you from contemporary news accounts reporting the death of Hamit Dardagan on 15th March 2007, a tragically average day in the context of that year, a day in which Iraq body count recorded more than 80 civilians killed in 35 incidents across the country. 4 of these bombings were in marketplaces. The reports read as follows. The dead included 18-year-old Hamit Dardagan, a vendor in Sadr City Market, who died trying to save scores of others when a carton containing a bomb exploded in his arms. Witnesses said Dardagan, who sold vegetables from a stall in the outdoor market, spotted the carton after someone left it under a table. Vendors have been especially cautious about strange boxes and bags because of the rash of bombings at markets across Baghdad. When Dardagan saw the carton, he began asking whom it belonged to. He quickly realized it did not belong there. He immediately picked it up and started shouting, "Beware, leave the place," said Ammar Saadi, another vendor. As the crowd around him fled in panic, Dardagan ran with the box in his arms toward a trash pile in an open area where he planned to hurl the container, but he realized he could not save himself and began praying out loud. He started to say, "I witness that there is no God but God," Saadi said. As he was about to throw the carton, it blew up, killing him and blowing off his brother's arm. "He was so nice with the people and the customers," Saadi said of Dardagan. "May God bless his soul. He gave his life to save other lives," another fellow trader said, wiping away tears. Those whose lives were saved by Ahmed will not forget him or need reminding to hold him in remembrance. That duty falls on us. Thank you.